The Wall is the most beloved Pink Floyd album, and it is also the exact place where Pink Floyd died, and I want to convince you that those two facts are not a contradiction. They are the same fact, seen from two sides. The Wall is magnificent. I am not here to take it down, and anyone who tells you it is a bad record is not listening. It is one of the most ambitious, most fully realized, most overwhelming things rock music ever produced. But it is magnificent the way a mausoleum is magnificent, the way a state funeral is magnificent, with everything in its place and the orchestra swelling and the whole thing built to last 1,000 years, and at the center of it, very quiet under all that grandeur, a body. The body is the band. The Wall is the greatest thing Roger Waters ever made, and it is the least Pink Floyd record Pink Floyd ever released, and the reason it sounds so enormous is partly that there is no longer anyone inside it pushing back. You're hearing one man's vision delivered without resistance, and a vision without resistance always sounds bigger than a vision that has to fight for every inch. The Wall is the sound of an argument that one side has already won, and winning, it turns out, is what killed the thing worth arguing about. Let me start with the fact almost nobody who loves this record knows, because it is the single most damning thing about the whole project, and it is hidden in plain sight. Richard Wright, the man who gave Pink Floyd its color, its harmonic atmosphere, the third kind of beauty that was neither Gilmour's nor Waters', was fired during the making of The Wall. Fired. Pushed out by Waters in the middle of recording the album the world considers the band's crowning achievement. And then, in one of the strangest ironies in rock history, hired back as a paid session musician to play the live shows. An employee on the stage of his own band. Sit with that for a moment. The most celebrated Pink Floyd album is the one on which 1/4 of Pink Floyd was demoted from member to hired hand. And the thing is, you can hear it once you know to listen. Where is the right atmosphere on The Wall? Where is the harmonic weather of us and them? The patient keyboard architecture of echoes, the chords that used to tell you how to feel before a word was sung. It is not there. What holds The Wall together harmonically is not Richard Wright. It is production. It is Bob Ezrin, the co-producer, and the orchestration, and the layering, the sheer engineered density of the thing. The Wall is full, overwhelmingly full, but it is full of production, not full of band. The color that used to come from a living member now comes from an arranger and a mixing desk. They replaced the man with a technique, and because the technique is brilliant, almost nobody noticed there was a man missing. This matters because it tells you what kind of object The Wall actually is. A Pink Floyd record, the real ones, the ones from the Golden Run, were the sound of 4 functions in tension. Gilmour, the body, the voice and the guitar, and the physical pleasure of pure sound. Waters, the mind, the concept and the words, and the refusal to let a record be merely pretty. Wright, the harmony, the climate. Mason, the pulse, the patient floor everyone stood on. Take those 4 and lock them in a room where none of them can ignore the others, and you get Dark Side, you get Animals, you get the friction that made the magic. The Wall's not that. By The Wall, the tension is gone because tension requires 2 forces, and Waters has become the only force in the room. Wright has been expelled. Mason has been reduced to executing drum parts inside a narrative that is no longer his. And Gilmour, the most important survivor, has become something heartbreaking. A session guitarist of genius playing brilliantly on another man's confession. The guitar is still his, but it is in service now, not in dialogue. He is illustrating Waters' story rather than fighting Waters for the soul of a shared record. 4 men became 1 man and 3 employees. And that is not a band. That is a solo project with the best supporting cast money could buy. And yet, here's where the record refuses to be simple. Here's the moment that saves The Wall from being merely a monument. And it is the reason I can call it magnificent without lying. Comfortably Numb. Listen to Comfortably Numb, and you are hearing the last real argument Pink Floyd ever had. Captured on tape, preserved forever, mistaken by the whole world for a climax when it is actually a farewell. The story behind that song is the story of the entire band in miniature. Waters wanted it one way, stripped down, orchestral, controlled, a cold and clinical thing that served the narrative. Gilmour wanted it the other way, expansive, soaring, the guitar reaching for the sky. They fought over it. They genuinely fought. And what you hear in the finished track is not a compromise. It is the fight itself, frozen in place. The verses are waters, contained, medicated, flat in the most deliberate way. The sound of a mind that has shut itself down, the melody moving in small defeated steps, the arrangement holding everything back. And then the chorus arrives and the guitar opens up and suddenly, there is Gilmour, the body, refusing to stay numb, reaching past the words into pure feeling. Listen to the two solos because they are two different philosophies of music arguing without speaking. The first solo is shorter, tighter, a statement, and the final solo is the one everyone remembers, the long one, the one that climbs and refuses to resolve. The bends held a fraction longer than comfort allows, the phrasing built to ache. That solo is not decoration laid over Waters' song. It is a rebuttal. It is Gilmour saying, with no words available to him, that there is something the lyric cannot reach and only the guitar can. And he's right. And the proof is that you remember the solo longer than you remember the verse. That is the limit at work. That is Gilmour being the wall Waters cannot crash through into pure clinical sermon one last time. Comfortably Numb is the best thing on the record precisely because it is the last track on which the tension is still alive. The last time two men were still each other's limit, and you can hear them straining against each other and producing out of that strain something neither would have made alone. It is the final breath of the band, and we have spent 40 years calling it a high point without noticing it was a goodbye. And listen, underneath it all, for Nick Mason, because his role on the wall tells the same story in a quieter register. On the great records, Mason was the floor, the patient, unflashy pulse that held the long pieces together by refusing to fill them, the architectural restraint that let the music breathe. On the wall, he is still excellent, still tasteful, but he is no longer holding up a shared structure. He's executing drum parts inside a narrative that was decided before he arrived. The pulse serves the story now. He has gone from being one of the four forces that made the shape to being a craftsman delivering a shape someone else designed. It is not that he plays badly. It is that the music no longer needs him to be a force, only a function, and a band in which the drummer has been reduced to a function is a band that has already stopped being a conversation among equals. Because after Comfortably Numb, the resistance ends. That is the whole arc. On the wall, the resistance flickers one last time in one song, and then it goes out. And the next record, the final cut, is what you get when there is no resistance left at all. Waters alone. The pamphlet fully arrived, the corpse. So the wall is not the death itself. It is the moment of dying. The long, spectacular collapse caught at its most beautiful. Animals was the last record where all four men held each other in balance. The wall is the record where the balance finally tips, where one force wins and the other three are subdued. And the tragedy is hidden inside the triumph so completely that the triumph is all anyone sees. People hold up the wall as proof of how great the band was. I'm telling you, it is proof of how the band ended. And that the very things that make it sound so huge, the lack of pushback, the uncontested vision, the production filling the space where a fired member used to be, are the symptoms of the ending. The wall sounds like a band at its peak. It is actually a man standing on the peak alone with the bodies of his collaborators arranged tastefully around him and an orchestra playing. I want to be fair to Waters here because this is not a story about a villain. The wall is great because Waters is great because the wound it comes from is real. The dead father, the cold mother, the alienation, the fame that felt like isolation, all of it true and all of it powerfully made. A lesser man could not have built this, but greatness in one man is not the same thing as a great band. And the confusion between those two is the oldest mistake we make about Pink Floyd. We hear something enormous and we credit the band, when what we are actually hearing is the band being replaced, function, by one man's will and a producer's technique. The enormity is not the band firing on all cylinders. The enormity is the sound of three cylinders being switched off and the fourth being amplified to fill the silence. So I will leave you where the record leaves me. with the most uncomfortable thought I have about the album so many people call their favorite. What if the greatest Pink Floyd album is not the band at its height, but the band in the act of dying, embalmed so beautifully that we mistook the funeral for a coronation? What if the reason the wall feels so monumental is the same reason a tomb feels monumental, because it is built to hold something that is no longer alive? And what if Comfortably Numb, the most beautiful thing on the whole record, the song everyone reaches for, is beautiful precisely because it is the last time these men ever truly fought each other, the last flicker of the friction that made them great, the final time Gilmour's guitar pushed back against Waters' words and won, before the wall closed over all of it for good? We have been listening to a goodbye for 40 years and calling it a masterpiece. What if it was both, and what if it could only ever have been both?